I watched my son, Marcus, pull a key from his pocket, the motion so casual it felt like a physical blow. It was the heavy, tarnished brass key to my study, a key he hadn't used in 20 years. "We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." The words weren't a question or a request, they were a low, unfeeling statement that felt like a courtroom verdict. I'd spent 40 summers watching the tide from that porch. Now, suddenly, it was just your beach house, a property to be liquidated. I saw the flash of the key reflecting the soft morning light, and in that harsh, brass glow, I didn't see my child, I saw a creditor. What kind of person makes arrangements to dismantle your life while you're still sitting in it? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe, it helps me keep sharing more. I felt the familiar burn of betrayal, a cold fire in my chest that had been banked since his father passed. My gaze fixed on the mahogany box on the mantel, the one holding his father's final letter, a place I had specifically told Marcus to leave untouched. Yet, the box was ever so slightly ajar. He must have opened it, searching for the deed, the title, the evidence he needed to execute this swift, brutal transaction. His face was a study in practiced neutrality, his jaw set, his eyes avoiding mine as he waited for my expected emotional meltdown, a scene he'd clearly rehearsed in his head. But I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. I just took in the sight of him, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the faded, comforting familiarity of the room, and I understood, for the first time, that he hadn't just sold the house, he had sold me. I simply said, "You sold it without my signature, Marcus. That's a problem." He offered a practiced, brittle smile, a mask that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I have the power of attorney now, Evelyn. Signed and notarized. Remember that packet you signed last fall when I helped with your estate planning?" He was talking about the paperwork I trusted him with, the moment I handed him the keys to my freedom, not my prison. My stomach dropped. I realized the signature wasn't the problem. The hidden truth was the betrayal had already happened, legally and coldly, months ago. I asked him, quietly, "What did your sister say when you told her?" That question, the mention of his sister, Thea, snapped the brittle facade right off his face. His eyes finally met mine, and the neutral mask dissolved into a brief, violent flash of rage and absolute contempt. "She knows her place," he spat, leaning in close enough for me to see the minuscule twitch under his eye, "and tomorrow, you'll know yours, too." The smell of stale cigarette smoke, a scent that always clung to Marcus when he was truly stressed, was thick in the air. I hadn't smelled it since his final exams in college. It was a subtle signal of his inner panic, a clue that his confident cruelty was just an act. He wasn't just selling the house, he was running from something enormous, and I suddenly felt a cold, quiet dread settle over me. I realized my life wasn't being rearranged by greed, but by desperation. I kept my voice low, steady, like the deep rumble of the ocean he was trying to sell. "Vance Kester tried this same trick with his mother's annuity, you know. It cost him a prison sentence." The name was a calculated strike, an old business rival of his father's whose legal tactics Marcus often admired. It worked. He flinched, the smugness evaporating for a fraction of a second, and he nervously ran his hand over the rough, expensive tweed of his jacket. I could almost feel the coarse texture of the wool through his gesture, a tangible representation of the prickly barrier he'd built between us. He leaned away from me, and the tension in the room ratcheted up, feeling like a wire pulled taut. He recovered quickly, offering a dismissive, patronizing wave of his hand. "Don't be dramatic, Evelyn. This is clean. And you'll be well looked after." But his assurances tasted like ash in my mouth, dry, bitter, and leaving a lingering chemical burn. The taste was worse than the words. Do you think I was too forgiving here, or was holding back my anger the right move? I needed concrete proof of his actions, something more than just his confident bluff. My eyes darted to the old, solid oak desk in the corner. Beneath the antique bronze lamp, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a small, white corner of paper. It looked like an index card. It wasn't the deed, that would be too obvious. This was different. My heart hammered, but I kept my breathing even, pretending to be utterly defeated. "I suppose you're right," I sighed, letting my shoulders slump. It's done then. Marcus took the bait, his expression immediately softening into a triumphant, pitying sneer. Good. I'll call the movers. As he turned his back to retrieve his briefcase, I knew my chance was now. My trembling hands, damp with sudden fear, reached out quickly. I snatched the card and palmed it, the thin, cool cardboard feeling razor-sharp against my skin. It was a recent bank receipt. Not the receipt for the house sale, but something infinitely worse. It was a wire transfer slip, dated last week, sending a crippling amount of money to an offshore account. The memo line was stark, written in his own, unmistakable handwriting. Final installment, Tay. I remembered the sound of the house when they were children, Marcus and Thea downstairs, inventing stories behind the sofa, their whispers weaving together like the rhythmic crash of the waves just outside. It was a sound that meant absolute safety. Now, that memory, the perfect, domestic calm, only amplified the sudden, chilling dread that Marcus's quiet betrayal had twisted Thea, too. The wire transfer slip felt like ice in my hand. 200,000 to her account, the final installment. Final. The word echoed the coldness of his final installment of my life. I wondered if I was grieving the loss of the beach house, or the loss of the two children who had once whispered secrets, and not schemes, to each other. The house suddenly felt hollow. The silence now was oppressive, broken only by the distant, faint sound of a car door slamming outside, a sharp, unwelcome noise that cut through my shock. I had pushed Thea to be independent, to take the path less taken, believing I was giving her strength. But had I simply pushed her away, straight into Marcus's calculating orbit? My regret was a heavy stone in my stomach. Was I being punished for something I failed to see? I thought back to Marcus's face, the flash of rage when I mentioned her name, and his cruel, dismissive line, "She knows her place." It wasn't about the money for her, it was about betrayal, settling an old score, and I suddenly felt a shiver run through my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I asked myself, what would you have done if your own son and daughter planned this behind your back? I stuffed the receipt deep into my pocket, the brittle paper now warm from my palm. I knew I couldn't confront him yet. I had to know the full extent of their pact. I had to understand the why. Marcus was still in the living room, gathering his documents, his footsteps measured and slow. He was too calm. I moved toward the kitchen, needing a moment, needing a weapon, or at least a clear head. Just as I reached the archway, a figure materialized in the doorway, blocking the sunlight. It wasn't a mover. It wasn't an estate agent. It was Thea. And she was holding the house deed. "Marcus called," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the warmth of a daughter. "He said you were getting difficult." The house deed she held wasn't the original, it was a forgery. The difference was subtle, but to my eye, an eye that had managed the books for a Fortune 500 company for decades, it was immediately apparent in the shade of the stamp. That meant the power of attorney Marcus boasted about was useless. But why would Thea, usually the principled one, arrive with a fake document? The sudden shock at this hidden layer of deception was a physical blow, leaving my throat tight and dry. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth I'd avoided. She was wearing a silk scarf, the color of burnt orange, a gift from her father that I'd specifically asked her not to wear until the estate was fully settled. It was a calculated insult, a sight meant to wound me. "You're getting difficult," she repeated, her voice perfectly calm, a terrifying echo of Marcus's earlier condescension. I knew then that the betrayal wasn't about the money for her, not entirely. It was about something older, heavier, something buried in the foundation of this house. I asked her, "Did you know I'd seen the transfer slip? Did Marcus tell you I knew you were being paid?" Her composure cracked. The silk scarf seemed to tighten, drawing the focus to the sudden pallor of her face. "Paid," she scoffed, but the high, forced pitch of her voice betrayed her. "This is mine, Mother. I earned this. This house, it was always supposed to be mine." I saw the long-hidden secret surface, not the house itself, but the resentment over the inheritance that she felt was unfairly skewed toward Marcus's business ventures. It wasn't just a house, it was a decade-old grief and a hidden grudge finally exploding. She didn't pause for my answer, instead she crossed the threshold and slammed the door shut behind her, the unexpected force rattling the window panes and making the whole house shudder. What would you have done if your own daughter showed up not to save you, but to seal the deal? You need to sign the final papers now, she demanded, slamming the forged deed onto the kitchen island so hard a ceramic fruit bowl rocked precariously. Marcus is bringing the buyer by at 5. She reached into her handbag, and I froze. My eyes locked on the sudden glint of polished metal. It wasn't a pen. It was the sharp, heavy corner of her father's old paperweight, the one shaped like a sailing ship. The one he used to tap on his desk when he was losing his temper. Now, in Thea's hand, it looked like a weapon. She had come prepared not just for legal action, but for a confrontation that might get physical. You came to threaten me with a paperweight, Thea? Is that what your father's legacy means to you? I asked, the sheer audacity of her action cutting through my shock and replacing it with focused, cold fury. The betrayal was so brazen, so direct, that it stripped away my grief and left only the need to survive this confrontation. She didn't drop the marble ship, she just tapped the rough, cold stone against the smooth quartz countertop, the touch of it making a faint, dry clack, a sound designed to intimidate. I came to finish what Marcus started, she countered, her breath hitching slightly, a tell that revealed her desperation was far greater than her brother's. I realized I wasn't dealing with two villains, but two deeply flawed people being driven by separate, equally toxic motives. Marcus was running from debt, Thea was running from an old wound. I needed to pivot. I needed to be the mother again, not the victim. I allowed a wave of calm reflection to wash over me, a brief moment to breathe. I remembered her hands as a child, small, delicate, always reaching for mine. Now those hands were wrapped around a piece of granite meant to hurt me. I spoke her full name, something I hadn't done since she was a teenager. Thea Evelyn. Put that down. Your brother didn't just sell the house, he sold you to get it done. The air in the kitchen grew heavy with the sudden, unspoken tension. I took a deliberate step toward her, closing the distance, and placed my hand firmly on the counter between us. I wanted her to feel the weight of my presence, the weight of the moment. My hand was warm against the surprisingly chilly marble, a stark contrast that represented the warmth I still held for her and the coldness of her current action. What kind of monster uses their own sister as collateral? That was the question that should have hit her. Instead, a new look crossed her face, fear, followed by instant guilt. What are you talking about? She whispered, the challenge fading from her voice. I pulled the wire transfer slip from my pocket and smoothed the crinkled paper on the counter. This. 200,000, the final installment. Marcus told the buyers the house needed an immediate, unscheduled foundation repair and pocketed the extra deposit, promising to wire the money back to the buyer after he got my signature. But he didn't wire it to the buyer, did he? He wired it to you. He used you as a shell company to clean the money. When the buyer finds out, they won't sue him. They'll sue the last person who held the deposit, the account the money landed in. Her face went completely blank, the realization of her brother's second, deeper emotional betrayal hitting her with the force of a tidal wave. She had been used, not just as an accomplice, but as the inevitable scapegoat. She had the keys to the escape, but he had loaded the legal trapdoor beneath her feet. I recalled the quiet, happy sound of Thea's childhood laughter echoing off the kitchen tiles, a sound usually accompanied by the faint clink of ice as she poured us lemonade. Now, the kitchen was silent, except for a high-pitched, almost imperceptible whine emanating from the refrigerator, a sound that always meant the seal was broken and everything inside was slowly warming. This current silence, broken only by that mechanical sigh of failure, perfectly mirrored the slow decay of her relationship with Marcus. The simple domestic memory felt twisted into dread, a silent warning that everything we held dear was now fundamentally damaged. The wire slip shook slightly in my hand. Her shock was palpable, her breathing shallow and quick. I watched as her face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, a flicker of something close to small relief or hope, the desperate, panicked hope that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't told anyone else yet. You haven't gone to the police, she stated, not asked. The low, desperate tone of her voice was a plea, the sound of a daughter finally recognizing the depth of her danger and the only person who could still help her. I was faced with my daughter, caught in her brother's trap, and I had to know, could I still trust her? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang, heavy with the weight of my 200,000 loss and her imminent legal peril. Marcus made sure to use your full legal name on that transfer, Thea Evelyn, I stated, my voice measured and cold. If that buyer's lawyer files a suit, it's not Marcus's company they target. It's you. He set you up to be the shield. The color drained entirely from her cheeks. The marble paperweight, forgotten in her hand, dropped with a muffled thud onto the counter. She pressed her palms flat against the cold quartz, leaning on it for support, and whispered a single word that I barely heard over the refrigerator's failing whine: proof. Proof. I questioned. You need to bring me absolute proof of Marcus's true motive, his debts, his scheme, the full paper trail, before I even consider destroying this receipt. She didn't hesitate. I have it. I knew he was reckless. I copied the files. They're in the boathouse, in Father's old tackle box. I was coming to blackmail him after the sale, not to help him. The speed of her confession confirmed my deepest fears. She was capable of betrayal, but she was also a careful, meticulous strategist, just like her father. As she turned, panicked, to leave for the boathouse, I stopped her with a word. My eyes fell upon a new sight, a faint, dark smear on the sleeve of her silk scarf, near the cuff. It wasn't mud. It was dried, rusty brown. It looked like dirt, but from something old and disturbed. What was that stain, and why did it suddenly make the danger feel far more physical than financial? The dark stain on Thea's scarf, the dried, rusty brown patch of disturbed earth, instantly pulled the entire narrative out of the realm of spreadsheets and into something far colder. I realized, with sickening clarity, that the betrayal had not just been planned in the shadows, it had been executed in the dirt. It wasn't the signature I should have been worried about, it was what they had already buried. My gaze locked onto the fabric, and in that fleeting moment, I saw the truth of the whole wicked plan laid bare. It was the sight of pure, unadulterated shock on her face when she noticed me looking at the stain that confirmed everything. She frantically tried to hide the cuff in her palm, but it was too late. I knew they hadn't just secured power of attorney, they had secured something else entirely. Thea, tell me right now, I demanded, my voice a dangerous, low rasp. What did you and Marcus bury? She recoiled as if I'd struck her. The immediate, total betrayal in her eyes was directed at Marcus, not me. She knew he had exposed her, not by paying her, but by forcing her to commit an action that left a visible, damning mark. This new knowledge, the sudden understanding that I was fighting against actual criminals, not just greedy children, made my heart beat faster than any argument ever could. He told me it was just an old safe, she stammered, backing away toward the door. He said Father kept a separate one buried out there with old corporate documents that weren't supposed to be found for 10 years. He said the buyer insisted it be removed immediately. I let her lie hang in the air for a moment, letting her see that I didn't believe the flimsy explanation. You didn't go to the boathouse today for files, did you? You went out this morning to dig. I didn't wait for her answer. I was certain. Do you think I was too trusting? Or was my initial suspicion about the earth stain justified? I need those files from the tackle box now, I said, pointing toward the back door. If you ever want to walk free from this mess, you have to prove Marcus had the upper hand, that he coerced you into burying, whatever that was. The panic was finally driving her. She nodded, speechless, and rushed toward the back door, desperate to find the proof that would save her. I heard the latch click as she vanished onto the porch. My eyes fell on the kitchen island again. In her haste, she had dropped more than the paperweight. Lying beside the forged deed was a single, small brass plaque. It was slightly tarnished, triangular, and had 2 words engraved on it in the ornate script his company used, E. Thorne. It was the brass nameplate from Elias Thorne's office door. But why would my children be digging up the nameplate of the business rival I mentioned earlier, the one whose mother's failed annuity Marcus admired? I picked up the small brass plaque, the E. Thorne nameplate, the metal shockingly cold against my fingertips, instantly transferring the frigid touch of the outside world, the world of graves and secrets. The shocking revelation was clear: my children weren't just trying to steal my house, they were using it to cover a deeper, far more dangerous corporate crime linked directly to the rival I had dismissed. The paper trail Marcus left wasn't about the beach house deposit. It was about Thorne. He was trying to frame his sister for a major financial felony connected to a powerful, vengeful family. My initial rage at being betrayed by my children transformed into a protective, desperate fury for Thea, who was sprinting blindly into a legal wildfire Marcus had set. The taste of betrayal, so metallic and bitter on my tongue earlier, was now the taste of urgency. I had to stop her. I rushed to the back door, shouting her name, but she was already gone, running across the damp sand toward the rickety boathouse at the end of the property. The door stood ajar, revealing the dark, oily interior where her father's tackle box, the evidence of Marcus's scheme, was hidden. I thought, what would you have done, knowing your daughter was seconds away from incriminating herself further? I had to think faster than Marcus planned. I grabbed my car keys from the hook, the action sudden and loud, and slammed the back door shut, making a noise that, unlike Thea's earlier slam, was deliberate and authoritative. I knew Marcus's buyer, Mr. Silas, was arriving at 5 p.m. That gave me less than 2 hours. I ran to the garage. Just as I was pulling the cord to open the heavy wooden door, the phone in my pocket vibrated a chilling, unexpected ring. I ignored it. I was about to jump into the car when I heard a distinct, heavy thud from inside the garage, followed by the sound of something metallic scraping the concrete floor right behind me. It wasn't Thea, and it wasn't Marcus. The sound was too heavy, too close. I spun around, and my heart seized. Standing there, between the workbench and the old sailing gear, was a tall, heavily built man in a dark, clean suit. He held a small, black satchel and his face was utterly expressionless. He was too calm, too clean for a mover, too imposing for an estate agent. He was a sentinel. He was the buyer, Mr. Silas, and he had clearly arrived early, not for the house, but for whatever my children had buried. The man in the suit didn't move. He didn't speak. The garage was filled with the oppressive, quiet dread of his presence, the only sound being the faint, distant thudding of the waves outside, a terrifying clock counting down my options. The most shocking revelation wasn't his arrival, but the sudden surfacing of his identity. He was here not as a potential owner, but as an enforcer for Elias Thorne's shadowy interests. He was here to claim whatever Marcus and Thea had buried. Mr. Silas, I presume, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. I didn't ask, I stated it, using the name Marcus had mentioned to force the acknowledgement. He finally moved, a slow, deliberate step that closed the distance between us, his leather shoes squeaking faintly on the concrete. The small, high-pitched squeak was the only honest sound he made, and it spoke volumes about his calculated approach. What kind of danger is so patient, so utterly silent? He didn't confirm the name, but he did confirm the agenda. The item you're looking for, he said, his voice a low, textureless rumble, is no longer in the house. Your son moved it earlier today. Now, where did he move the evidence? He knew about the digging. He knew Marcus had double-crossed him, too. Marcus had buried one item to distract Silas, then moved the real evidence. This was the most profound emotional betrayal yet. Marcus hadn't just used his sister, he had deliberately antagonized a dangerous enemy and left his entire family to take the fall. I suddenly understood the full scope of the inheritance. It wasn't a house, it was a distraction. I looked him dead in the eye, trying to gauge if he was capable of real violence. You won't find it here. And you won't harm my daughter, I asserted, gripping my car keys tight enough to feel the sharp edge pressing into my palm. He smiled then, a small, chilling upward curve of the lips. Your daughter, he repeated, looking past me toward the sound of the ocean, is currently retrieving something from the boathouse. I imagine that is the item your son didn't have time to move. He paused, letting the implication hang. The problem, Evelyn, is that both of your children have been telling me what they thought I wanted to hear. The truth is much messier. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just seen Thea go to the boathouse, he had been watching the entire time. He wasn't the buyer, he was the cleanup crew. I knew I had to stall him, to buy Thea enough time to find the files and escape. I have the ultimate leverage now. The only thing that proves anything, I whispered, holding up the tiny brass E. Thorne nameplate, is the motive. And I know Marcus's motive. It has nothing to do with this house. As I spoke, I watched Silas's eyes flick to the garage door handle. I realized he wasn't planning on talking, he was planning on locking me in. And I had given him the perfect distraction. The most shocking revelation of all was the one I almost missed, the phone call I had ignored earlier. It wasn't Marcus. It was the maritime insurance adjuster for the Elias Thorne yacht. I knew that the confession I was about to hear would reveal the true end to the conflict, and I had to buy time. I gripped the cool brass nameplate, my hands damp with sweat and the residue of the garage's oily air, the unpleasant, metallic taste of fear rising in my throat. "You won't find it here. And you won't harm my daughter," I asserted, gripping my car keys tight enough to feel the sharp edge pressing into my palm. He smiled then, a small, chilling upward curve of the lips. "Your daughter," he repeated, looking past me toward the sound of the ocean, "is currently retrieving something from the boathouse. I imagine that is the item your son didn't have time to move." He paused, letting the implication hang. "The problem, Evelyn, is that both of your children have been telling me what they thought I wanted to hear. The truth is much messier." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just seen Thea go to the boathouse, he had been watching the entire time. He wasn't the buyer, he was the cleanup crew. I knew I had to stall him, to buy Thea enough time to find the files and escape. I had the ultimate leverage now. "The only thing that proves anything," I whispered, holding up the tiny brass E. Thorne nameplate, "is the motive. And I know Marcus's motive. It has nothing to do with this house." As I spoke, I watched Silas's eyes flick to the garage door handle. I realized he wasn't planning on talking, he was planning on locking me in. And I had given him the perfect distraction. The most shocking revelation of all was the one I almost missed, the phone call I had ignored earlier. It wasn't Marcus. It was the maritime insurance adjuster for the Elias Thorne yacht. I knew that the confession I was about to hear would reveal the true end to the conflict, and I had to buy time. I gripped the cool brass nameplate, my hands damp with sweat and the residue of the garage's oily air, the unpleasant, metallic taste of fear rising in my throat. I looked Mr. Silas straight in the eye. "You're too late. The files that prove Marcus coerced Thea, the actual evidence, isn't in the boathouse. The only thing they dug up was a distraction." I lied, leveraging the new information I had just realized. "The real evidence is the yacht's satellite log. And I just spoke to the adjuster." Silas's composure finally shattered. The sheer power of the Thorne name, and the implications of a federal insurance claim, broke through his calculated silence. He lunged for the garage door handle, but I was faster. I ducked past him and sprinted out, pulling the door down with a sickening clatter and locking it with the external bolt. He was trapped. I ran to the boathouse. Thea was crouched over her father's tackle box, sobbing, the old fishing lures scattered around her. I couldn't find the folder. "He must have moved it," she choked, the full regret and grief of her actions washing over her. I pulled her to her feet. "It doesn't matter, honey. We have the leverage now. But we have to move fast." We sped away in the car, leaving the beach house and Silas behind. Later that evening, safe at my lawyer's office, Thea finally looked at the transfer slip, the forged deed, and the brass nameplate together. The files she found did prove Marcus's debt and coercion, but the final piece of the puzzle came from the insurance adjuster I had called back. Elias Thorne hadn't vanished, he had intentionally scuttled his own yacht for the multi-million-dollar insurance payout. Marcus, desperate for quick cash, had learned of Thorne's scheme and tried to blackmail him, not realizing Silas was Thorne's cleanup crew. Marcus's scheme was to frame Thea for the money laundering to pay the blackmail. The final, painful truth was that the nameplate they buried, the thing they thought was evidence, was actually just a trophy for Marcus, a memento of the corporate crime he admired. I realized then that the biggest betrayal wasn't the theft of the house, it was the theft of their character. Marcus ended up facing charges for extortion and fraud, protected from the full extent of the Thorne conspiracy only by the evidence his sister provided. Thea was given immunity for testifying, but she lost her brother and gained an indelible lesson. When you build your life on secrecy, you inherit not wealth, but the legal debris of others. Now he begs at my door for bail, but I've learned that staying away can be powerful too. If this story taught you that true security isn't found in property but in honesty, please comment honesty below. If this happened in your town tomorrow, Wouldn't you want to know first? Subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard.